Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this, the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better, and it appears that the theme of my videos between Christmas and New Year, or at least for the festive period, has been, hey look, there are white pills coming. And today is no different because we have had some frankly bombshell polls that really do show us with some accuracy that the reform movement is only growing. And frankly it is growing quite rapidly. So firstly it is the JL Partner Polls Polaris model forecast in the Sunday Times, and we'll go into the Sunday Times soon, but it shows that Reform is surging to 71 seats. Now this is largely in line with what we have been seeing with other polls, which is Reform, even though they got about 14% of the vote in the general election, they are now polling pretty consistently anywhere between 20% and in some cases 25%, while the two main parties are having massive trouble breaking 30%. And as we can see, that is causing quite a stir when it comes to the first past the post system when it is projected onto seats. With Labour still in the lead but losing its massive majority down to 256 seats, Conservatives gaining quite a bit, up to 208 via basically not doing anything, just letting Labour make its mistakes. Reform, though, they are up for a small party very high at 71 seats. This is more seats than the Lib Dems when they were part of the coalition government. They had 57 seats, and even now they have more at 66 seats, and that's largely due to Reform's influence of sapping away votes from both Conservatives and Labour, though where Lib Dems win seats, it is taking it away from Conservative votes. And as James Johnson says, this model is very useful because it uses real elections to forecast, and it was actually very predictive in the 2019 and 2024 models, because our polls aren't quite like those polls in America. Our polls are actually fairly accurate most of the time. And as much as people like to keep reminding me that Peter Hitchens said polls are more there to influence people than actually get an answer, when it comes to election polls, no, they are actually quite accurate when it comes to predicting outcomes. And anyway, what you're trying to influence here, I guess you're trying to influence people to vote. Well, the vote's 4 years away, so it would have been pretty useless to try and influence people to vote using these polls. But anyway, as mentioned, there was another poll. This is an MRP poll from More in Common, once again, typically a very accurate poll, and this is showing largely similar numbers. Labour and Tories both in the 200s, Reform on 70 odd seats, Lib Dems on, well, around 60 to 65, and frankly, who cares about the rest, though, to be fair, it is very interesting that the independents are seen to be keeping their seats. The Greens actually lose their seats, which I find quite interesting. Maybe my prediction of the Greens will replace Labour will not come to fruition, thank God for that. SNP, obviously, they're making a comeback because Labour's so useless, but overall, as I say, these are very interesting polls because what they are clearly showing is that there is no natural governing party in Britain at this point in time. And the largest third party is Reform, that at this point is, as my title says, effectively makes them a kingmaker. In terms of the parties have two choices here. They can either do their best to try and align with Reform's policies, to try and siphon some of the votes away from Reform, or they can try and make a pact with them, a la 2019 with the Tories and Reform, where they make a deal to not stand against each other to then go forward into a coalition government. Personally, I can't see that happening. Either of them, I mean. In terms of rhetoric, you're already seeing it happening. The problem is that absolutely nobody believes either the Labour or the Tories when they say they are going to do anything about immigration. People will believe it with Reform, because Nigel Farage has been banging that drum for literally decades, but obviously has barely been in a position to do anything about it, and now that Reform are in Parliament, they are doing an awful lot of work with everything that they can do within their power to keep that issue in the headlines, keep putting the government's feet to the fire any way they can. Obviously they just get ignored by them, but people can see that they are quite serious about trying to do serious politics. And it takes time to make a new political party a household name, but it's happened before. SNP have managed it, Lib Dems have managed it, apparently Plaid Cymru, even though they're not as popular, they are very much a stronghold on the west side of Wales. The Greens are a household name, an awful lot of metropolitan cities. But obviously Reform have a wider net to cast. They are looking to be a household name basically throughout Britain. And it looks like that is slowly but surely happening. These things do not happen overnight. And if going from 5 seats to a consistently predicted 70-odd seats in 6 months doesn't convince you that they're growing, I don't know what to tell you. At this point in time, I don't particularly see this momentum slowing down. And the more time goes on and the worse problems as a result of immigration, red tape, lack of productivity, giving unions everything they want, so the worse those problems get over time, which they will get worse over Labour's time, the more popular the right-wing parties get, and I would say especially Reform, because too many people have been burned by the Conservatives for too long. I know that I am one of those people. Anyway, another interesting thing to look at is exactly where these Reform wins are happening, and as you can see from the picture, it's mostly taking over the Red Wall. And this makes sense. This is where Reform were largely seen, coming in a close second behind Labour in the last election, and obviously most of these people feel like they have been burned by Labour this time round, and so, well, where are they going to go? They're either not going to vote, or they're going to move to Reform, because why would these people move to Tories after what happened with Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak? There is absolutely no way I'm putting Theresa May. Definitely Theresa May as well, but I was going to say Liz Truss. There is no way they were burned by Liz Truss. She didn't have enough time to burn them. But you can also see it happening in the Labour heartlands of the North East, around Newcastle and Darlington. You're seeing a few in East Anglia, and of course Kent. Again, this is just happening 6 months after Labour had a landslide victory. As you can see, the map is largely blue with the Tories, but there are clear places where Reform is being favoured. And of course, the Lib Dems are winning in the southwest quite a lot as well. That will be due mainly to Reform siphoning votes off the Tories, as I said before, allowing for the Lib Dems to clinch victory in these places. And of course, Labour have done so badly that the SNP are getting back in power up in Scotland. This is how bad Sir Keir Starmer's government has been. But even Scotland itself is quite a unique case, because apparently quite a large part of the SNP voting bloc is effectively disenfranchised young men, and some of them are actually moving over to Reform because a lot of young men don't really care what the result is. They are just fed up with the managed decline that they have been seeing their entire lives. They want something positive to vote for, and the SNP have been spinning the story of Scottish independence for quite a while, but some of them are actually more convinced by Reform, if the polls are to be believed. And of course, Wales also has a couple of Reform constituencies, according to this poll. However, every single one of those Labour strongholds on that map will be under threat. It will be Labour first, Reform close second, and Tories probably won't see much success in Wales ever again. They have one constituency right on the tip of Wales in Pembrokeshire, and that'll be mostly because that is a very rural area. So they might be safe there. The rest of it, though, Plaid Cymru, Labour or Reform, they are pretty much neck on neck on neck when it comes to the polls, and it's going to make for a very, very interesting Welsh parliamentary election, because we have proportional representation here in Wales, and so that means that you could end up effectively with 3 main parties in the Welsh Senate. Nothing will get done, and pretty much every Welsh person will praise the Lord for that, because the worst thing that's happened to Wales is that Labour can actually get stuff done, and it's made basically everything worse than England. Anyway, to go into more detail on this poll commissioned by the Times, because they and their readers were very interested in this, it is implied that the national vote share has Labour on 25%, Tories on 26%, so interestingly, Tories win popular vote, but Labour win on seats. God, you gotta love first past the post. Reform on 21%, Lib Dems on 14%, Greens on 8%, SNP on 2%, and other parties on 3%. And this is the very interesting thing about first past the post system, and why frankly I wouldn't get rid of it for the world, despite the fact that Reform are talking about replacing it. It makes a very unique playing field, where effectively the best strategy to actually win an election is to effectively go around trying to convince the locals that you would be the best for their area, rather than with PR, where you try and cast a wider net as possible to compromise between many different people with many different interests, and basically it makes everyone unhappy. And in doing so, if Europe for the past century is to be believed, you just end up with very soft centre-left coalitions, which, at least with the UK, you can get a Thatcher every once in a while. Or if you go to times before universal suffrage, you basically only had people who only had the best interests of who they were representing at heart. Whereas, as we've seen from the Tories and Labour, okay, Labour have been good for the unions, but they have absolutely no interest in the country or making it better, at least if the last 30 years are to be believed. But then you get a rising star like Reform, they get taken seriously, and, well, you can have a massive political earthquake, which is exactly what we are seeing now. Another interesting part is that 7 of the cabinet ministers would lose their seats, 6 of them to Reform. Wedge Street in the Health Secretary would lose Ilford North to an independent candidate, according to the analysis, which, again, this is why I find first past the post such a fascinating way to elect our representatives, because this independent candidate, probably an awful lot like the other independent candidates who are all trying to create a party in the new year, I believe, where it will effectively probably be a Gaza vote, frankly. Well, yes, I've just checked the results of Ilford North for last election, and Streeting won by about 500 votes, and it was so narrow to an independent called Lian Mohammed. So there you go. The other people that Reform would take in this prediction, though, is it's just God's gift to me, apparently. So Angela Rayner would lose her seat, hooray. Yvette Cooper, hooray. John Healey, don't care. Ed Miliband, yay. Bridget Phillipson, very happy with that because she's trying to get rid of Shakespeare, even though I hated learning Shakespeare, it's still obviously useful. And Jonathan Reynolds, who is a useless business secretary. And in this poll as well, 2 further cabinet members would face tight races. They are estimated to win by less than 5 percentage points against Reform. That's Pat McFadden and Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary. Again, both people I would happy to see leaving Parliament. Now, obviously, this is a poll, and it's a poll about an election that's 4 years away. An awful lot can happen between now and then. However, this is just absolutely excellent news for Reform, because once again, it's furthering their success and news of their success to potential voters. This is all helping with their momentum. And I don't think that was the Times' intention. I think the Times just wanted to find out just how badly Labour was doing. And as the analysis had turned out, it turns out that, as I've said, Reform are really showing where there is a massive gap in the market for people to vote. Because, all right, 72 seats obviously isn't going to make you Prime Minister or anything like that. Well, we'll get into that as well soon. However, once again, you've got to realise where the direction of travel's going. It's clearly going away from both Conservatives and Labour, and obviously the Conservatives have made an improvement here because Labour have obviously been so bad for an awful lot of people, especially pensioners, that they are probably encouraged to go out and vote. And so when the sample was done of 11,000 people, which is actually quite large for a poll, when they've probably seen a rise in pensioners saying, yes, I'd definitely vote Tories because I want my pension back. Because as much as they try and say you need to work hard and save for the future, they still love their benefits. But even with all that, they can still only just about get past the 200 mark again. As far as I'm concerned, the big two parties are dying a death. It's just a very slow motion car crash. And where these things are going to be in 5 years is anybody's guess, but I would imagine that they will be hovering around the 200 mark, beating it if they're lucky, and you will see Reform in the 100s. At which point your first past the post system is, well, is going to be questioned. Anyway, the Times has their own analysis on how devastating this is. The next general election could herald the end of Britain's traditional system of two-party politics, with 271 seats won with less than a third of the vote. In another 221-seat winner would hold a lead of less than 5 percentage points, where even a smaller swing could change the results, according to the analysis. In 87 seats, the result is too close to actually predict. There is a statistical tie, with their estimated winner less than 2 percentage points ahead of their closest rival. To translate that into English, effectively what they're saying is that there are error bars in an awful lot of these constituencies that show that effectively, they could go to Labour or they could go to Reform. Or it could go to Tories or it could go to Reform. So this is their best guesswork, but effectively what it's saying is that it is well within the realm of possibility that Reform gain an extra 20 or 30 seats, say, and collectively the Labour and Tory party lose about 20 to 30 seats, should there be a slight swing one way or the other. But obviously, as I say, we're 4 years away from the election. The important part of this poll is that Labour and Tories, they're just not recovering. They're just not recovering. In fact, they are both waning in terms of support. If you look, I should say, over an average of like 5 years, bear in mind that was Boris Johnson's massive win back in 2019, barely scraping 200 from the Tories ain't good. Labour, they've always been in the 200s, but after a freak win and now they're down to 200, it's not good for either of them. Whereas Reform, they've been a serious party for what? Probably a year by now, something like that. Yeah, and they're up to 72 seats. It's not something you should ignore, and it is not something that anyone should be trying to dismiss, yet I'm seeing plenty of it from people who frankly just have an issue with Farage. At least that's all I can gather from their opinions. And this point is echoed by Luke Trill, the Executive Director of More in Common UK, who said, with potentially 4.5 years to go, this model is not a prediction of what would happen at the next general election, but instead it is a confirmation of the fragmentation of British politics that we saw in July's election, and that has only accelerated in Labour's 6 months in office, because Labour have been completely useless. The first-past-the-post system is struggling to deal with that degree of fragmentation, which is why our model shows so many seats on a three-way knife edge, and many being won on exceptionally small shares of votes. There is no doubt that many voters will have found the start of Starmer's government disappointing, that's putting it lightly, and Labour's estimated vote share would drop significantly were there to be an election tomorrow. While the new government is still in its infancy, it is clear that decisions such as means testing the winter fuel allowance and other budget measures have landed very badly. But as I say, why is there fragmentation? Because Reform is growing. That is the point I am trying to make. As I say, according to this poll, Reform are effectively the Kingmakers. They are the party that is saying, hey, this is where there is a big gap in the market. Please deal with immigration. Please do something about the cost of living crisis. What you have been doing for 14 years that Labour have largely said you need to do more of the bad thing isn't working. And another problem is that nobody trusts the big two parties, so even if they do have good rhetoric, probably going to be largely meaningless at this point. I mean, look at the whole thing on immigration. Oh, great, we now can say it's an open borders experiment from under the Tories because Labour have said it. Okay, what have they done to close the borders? Oh, nothing. Oh, they'll smash the gangs. Okay, there's still more people than ever crossing the channel. Clearly, you are humiliating yourselves. And this three-way tie is obviously shown in the bookies as well. It's always worth looking at the gambling market when it comes to politics because, man, they want to be really accurate because they rely on making millions of pounds from being accurate. And as you can see, who is going to win the most seats? Well, next election, they actually most likely think it's going to be Conservatives at 11 to 8, but very close behind at 7 to 4, it is Labour, and then close behind yet again, it is Reform UK at 2 to 1. Now that is actually a relatively comfortable lead for the Conservative Party, which might disappoint an awful lot of us, but that is because the bookies must have some crazy insider information, because what this all is dependent upon is who exactly is the leader of these parties. Because while they think the Conservatives are going to win, that you have to look at who they think the next Prime Minister is going to be. Because basically nobody thinks that Keir Starmer is going to win the next election. Hell, most people think that he's going to be replaced before the next election. But you look at the odds for the next Prime Minister, Nigel Farage is 2 to 1. He's the most likely to win by a bit of a margin, with Kemi Badenoch at 7 to 2. And then you get into much less likely scenarios with Wes Streeting at 7 to 1, Boris Johnson at 14 to 1. Apparently that's more likely than James Cleverly at 16 to 1. But clearly what is being shown here is that it will be some right-winger more than likely as the next Prime Minister. In fact, the betting market seems to think that it's going to be Nigel Farage. Now you might think, how is Nigel Farage the next Prime Minister if Reform is least likely out of the big three to win the most seats? Well, I think there must be some insider information that the betting markets have here, because what this says to me is that effectively there's going to be a Reform Conservative merger. And what's going to happen from that is that they are going to put Nigel Farage in charge to effectively have a revolution of the Tory party, effectively kick out the wets. At least that's what it says to me. I mean, it's obviously also entirely possible that there's that merger and then the Reform side get compromised. That is obviously a worry. But I don't think it's likely at all, at least at this point, that there's going to be a merger. But obviously anything can happen in 4.5 years. And the betting markets seem to think that come a few years down the line, there probably will be a merger. Why will there be a merger? Because, well, Labour's that bad. We need to do something about it. Well, okay, why are Labour bad? Right, let's get out all of the Tories that said Starmer's actually doing a decent job, which some unironically is saying. And, well, hell, you basically have a Tory party, who are the most successful party in the world, with a Reform manifesto, and also with the ability to hopefully implement it. I mean, I know I've been burned by them before, but hell, I'm optimistic. And as I say, at this point in time, I don't think it's particularly likely you're going to see a Conservative Reform merger, but according to the betting markets, it's actually quite likely. But this all gets even more confusing when you look at the odds for the next Conservative leader. Clearly, again, much like Keir Starmer, basically nobody thinks that Kemi Badenoch's going to last till the next election. And James Cleverly's the most likely to be the next Tory leader, which, I mean, that is the Tories on suicide watch, really, after that. There's no way they're going to succeed with James Cleverly. And then Nigel Farage, again, is in second with 5-1. Now, what I think is going on here is that, obviously, with the next Prime Minister, they have to look a bit further in the future than the next Tory leadership contest, which honestly could happen. I mean, she's basically guaranteed to be leader until next November, when she was voted in, obviously, this November. And I think, I mean, she's just been embarrassing so far. If she doesn't improve in any way, I imagine that they are going to panic and say, okay, we need another leader, someone who's not an idiot. And obviously then they're going to vote in James Cleverly, realise he's an idiot as well. And then a year after that, that's probably when you're going to see people demanding a merger, because, you know, a lot of the pensioners want their triple lock and their free 400 quid over December so that they can pay for their heating. Well, I have to work for my money to pay for my heating, but anyway. That is what I imagine the story being told here is. The Tories haven't learned their lesson properly yet, so they will get someone in who made all their problems, James Cleverly. They will realise that he is making their problems even worse, and that's when they give up and say, just bring reform over. And that's when you get Nigel Farage as leader of the Tories. Now, again, as I say, I can't see that being likely at the moment, simply because of how much reformers frankly hate the Tories. However, if it's the type of deal where effectively they say, we're desperate here, Nige, you just do what you have to do, and then the Tory party effectively turns into Nigel Farage's personal, effectively, party, I can see the changes being made to the Tory party being enough to convince a lot of people over. Because the name Nigel Farage has absolutely incredible sway over people, one way or the other. It's either people like me who think the guy's great, or it's people like James O'Brien who think he is literally Hitler. And so, as I say, all I can say is that it's going to be a very interesting next few years. I'm not going to be starved for content. But my god, if a merger does end up happening, I think I'm just going to have to do a 24-hour straight stream just to get over the fact that this is exactly what's happening, that it is actually happening. The Tories are actually trying to be right-wing for once. And whether Nigel Farage gets compromised or not, I don't know. I know from the advice he's getting, he's being told, never trust the Tories again. And I can see that advice holding for the next few years, so God knows what's going to happen. Unless the Tories have a total collapse, and then it is effectively just, oh, I can pick up this completely broken toy and make it in my own image. That's the only way I can see it happening. Can I see the Tories completely collapsing? No, not really. I think it's quite difficult to collapse the oldest party in the world, but, well, according to the betting market, you're going to probably see Nigel Farage as leader of the Tories at some point, and getting the most seats. It's a very confusing time. I don't think anyone knows what's going to happen. And, well, that makes it best for when we're making predictions and things like this. And, you know, I get some things wrong, but as time goes on, we will find out how accurate or inaccurate my prediction there is. Anyway, I think with all that, that is the end of the video there. So, in terms of shilling, this Friday. Oh wow, that's come up quick. This Friday, it will be Laughing at the Guardian with special guests from the Lotus Eaters, along with John and Tharium. So do look forward to that. It should be a grand way to bring in the new year. And then obviously we're back to usual schedules next Monday with the Antiquity show over on the Worcester Club, where we are still going through the Peloponnesian War, so do come along to that. And also on Tuesday we will be doing a Tosh Talks, going through our predictions for 2025 and putting them on a bingo card. And then obviously regular scheduling from then on, Antiquity every Monday, Tosh News or Tosh Talks every Tuesday. Right, if you enjoyed this video, obviously give it a like. If you enjoy my work more generally, obviously do become a subscriber. If you think I'm worth it even more than just your subscription, you can become a channel member as well. You get given thanks in the description, and it massively helps out the channel and helps me. You know, it gives me motivation to do more of these videos, which obviously if you're watching all of them, you obviously like them, so why not consider it? Or if you'd rather, whenever I'm streaming, you can send a super chat, or in any particular good video, you can also just send a one-off super thanks. Anything is helpful. But obviously, just being a subscriber is a massive help in and of itself. So, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.